Jadi sekarang secara langsung ke Facebook, go live now.
Good afternoon to everyone in attendance today. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us here in this event. Your presence is very much appreciated. And as you all know, we are going through tough times today with the ongoing pandemic, and almost every other event has been shifted to an online platform. But you know what they say, the show must go on. And who knows, after today, you might even pick up a new interest in literature. So firstly, let me introduce myself. I am Sheikh Azad, a Year 4 Malay Studies undergraduate from NUS, and I'll be your MC and also your moderator for today. So this forum is organized as part of the Malay program for the Poetry Festival Singapore 2021 in collaboration with NUS Malay Studies Society with the support of the National Arts Council. So under this year's theme of community, the event hopes to initiate critical discussions on Sufi poetry. The Ocean of Sufi Poetry, the name of this event, will discuss the legacy of Sufi poetry and explore the works and impact of 3 prominent poets from Southeast Asia and South Asia. So what defines Sufi poetry? Is Sufi poetry relevant today for our community in Singapore? And what sets it apart from other genres of poetry? So before we dive into these questions, let me first invite Dr. Azhar Ibrahim as the convener of this event to give us his opening remarks. Dr. Azhar, please.
Thank you, Sheikh. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. This is our 7th Poetry Festival with a theme on community, organized by the Malay section or chapter of the Poetry Festival Singapore. The segment, The Ocean of Sufi Poetry, is a celebration of the great master of spiritual poems from various regions. The Sufi tradition historically has produced a great many mystics whose poetic verse has been one of the eloquent expression of men of religion and spirituality. The affirmation of divinity and spirituality speaks volume for the Sufis' call for justice, common brotherhood, equality, and the love for beauty, serenity, and peace. This is our debut feature of wanting to promote spiritual poetry, and in Malay Indonesian world, this is synonymous to the Sufi poetry. And speaking of Sufi poetry from this part of the world, we cannot afford to link it with the great master of Sufi poets from the classical past. Indeed, poetry and spirituality are often synonymous, if not inseparable. The objectives of this discursive panel are to showcase great poets of Sufi tradition that have emerged in various linguistic and cultural traditions, to recognize the significance of spirituality, ethics, and aesthetics as found in their biophilic tradition, or the love of life. To appreciate the common values of human community, the universality of spiritual message, and the eloquence of human imagination for humanity, humaneness, and the sense of divine. Fourth, to attract wider readership of poetry vis-a-vis, to be aware of the discourse and scholarship surrounding the great poets of the past whose eloquence are vital for the present. We are very honored to have Dr. Faizal Tehrani, a renowned Malaysian author and distinguished academic, to deliver the keynote address. Thanks to Dr. Faizal for your kindness to join us this afternoon amidst your heavy schedule. Another important feature of this segment is the fact that the 3 panelists are young researchers who will be speaking on Sufi poetry, namely Ahmad Ubaidillah, Ahalla Tsauro, and Saddiq. And they will be speaking on on Sufi poets covering the region of Sumatra, Java, and South Asia. Our thanks to Ikhwanul Muntaqa, who will be performing an interlude of verses of peace and brotherhood. Allow me to close this remark with one of the finest lines from Nasir Khusraw, Qasidah. Qasidah is one of the odes popular in the Middle East. He says this: look at the trees, replete with leaves and fruits, whose leaf is talent and their fruit is knowledge. I believe this segment of the ocean of Sufi poetry can point us to that direction. Thank you so much. Sheikh?
Thank you, Dr. Azhar, for that wonderful opening. So without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Faizal Musa, also known as Faizal Tehrani. He's a Malaysian-born writer and academic. He attained his Bachelor of Sharia from the University of Malaya in 1998, his Master of Arts in Comparative Literature from the University of Science Malaysia in 2000, and a PhD in Comparative Literature from the Institute of the Malay World and Civilization, National University of Malaysia in 2010. His research interests include human rights, Islamic orientations, ideologies, and its impact on society. He has also written novels such as Tuhan Manusia, 1515, Professor, and Karbala. Dr. Faizal will enunciate the poetry of Rumi, whose spirituality and ethics encapsulated in verse has been one of the classics of world literature. Without further ado, Dr. Faizal, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you, Sheikh, for the opening notes, and Dr. Azhar Ibrahim, my friend there in Singapore, for introduction of our event today, the Ocean of Sufi Poetry. Thank you very much for attending Sunday evening to learn and to know, to understand basically what we perceive as Sufism and Sufi poetry. All right, before we start to dig into the Sufi poetry, it's important for us to understand first what is the Sufis and who are the Sufis and what is actually Sufism, yeah, in order not to get too excited to label such and such works as Sufi poetry, or Sufi literature, or Sufi prose, yeah. All right, first of all, it is common perception that the Sufis avoid to clash with power or the authorities, yeah. For instance, Farida Hanam suggests that the early generation of Sufis are known to avoid worldly affairs, hence focusing themselves with spirituality and engagement with God. They found asceticism in prayers and supplications. Azad, the slide, please. First slide. Yeah, so this quotation in length is from Farida Hanam, where she actually emphasized that Sufis actually avoid matters of the world, and they remember God in the midst of performing all the necessary mundane activities. Their reward will be double. They have this idea, and poverty was their ideal. And to achieve high level of concentration, they usually focus on certain supplications or prayers. However, next slide. It's also important that we understand that there are other dimensions of Sufism, yeah. And so the Sufis, according to Rabia Shamsuddin Qazi, the Sufis were popular because they preach monotheism, equality, universal brotherhood, and social justice. They preach love, not hatred, peace, not war. Generally speaking, these Sufis and mystics kept themselves aloof from politics and wars. Now, I'm particularly interested with this point that the Sufis are consistent in preaching towards equality, fraternity, and social justice, known today as modern human rights. So before going deeper into this, it is necessary to understand Sufism, yeah? However, attempt to define what is Sufism is not an easy one, especially that the term Sufi itself is very much contested. And today, Sufi studies are marked and inherited by the Orientalist point of view. Yeah, for example, Benjamin J. Cook, for example, argues that Sufism is merely a name, an umbrella term, so broad that its content or reality remains an unresolved dispute. Next slide, Shaykh. Okay, So he further reminds that these Orientalists have shaped their own understanding on Sufism, while cited Alexander King's important work, Historiography of Sufi Studies in the West. So what is actually Sufi studies? The emphasis is on academic scholarly studies, which analyze primary texts and expressions of Sufism from the point of anthropological studies. Now, this is actually a discipline that started as a first and foremost philological, text-centered exercise, gradually evolved into a subdivision of cross-religious studies pursued by curious amateurs, diplomats, travelers, colonial officials, biblicists, and area studies specialists, or the Orientalists. All right, next slide. Thus, approaching Sufism as Islamic mysticism or Islamic Sufism are very much problematic. The concept of Islamic mysticism is introduced to simplify the term Sufism as understanding of mysticism as a rejection of orthodoxy, while the approach to Islamic Sufism is directed towards non-Islamic audience. Now, moving on from this confusion, I am more comfortable with the idea that Sufi as the culmination of soteriological development. As stated by Benjamin Jacob, irrespective of whether a Sufi is someone who has reached their summit of soteriological development or someone who has reached a particular point within their soteriological development, the esteem given to the Sufis is high, even if they are not beyond the criticism of some writers. Now, soteriology in this regard is salvation. So the doctrine of salvation or soteriology is in fact an important doctrine in Islam. So the salvation comes with monotheism, for example, prophethood, and faith in hereafter. In fact, in all religions, soteriology or salvation is the main teaching. Now, I have that a very quite long, lengthy quotation from Brian Christopher Smith that explain what is actually and how is salvation being achieved. Yeah, so not just by through prayers or supplications or doing good deeds, but also there are many other kind of salvation that we're going to discuss. Now, my argument, next slide, will be soteriology is the reason why Sufis are committed to champion equality, universal brotherhood, and social justice. Now, again, my argument will be soteriology is the reason why Sufis are committed to champion equality, universal brotherhood, and social justice. Now, the salvation as emphasized in Islam are different between Sunni and Shia school of thought. Now, Shia Islam is considered nearer to Sufism compared to Sunnism. Now, according to Said Hussein Nas, a very famous, renowned scholar, especially his research on Islamic mysticism, the emphasis on Ali as an early savior, for example, illustrates the connection between Shiism and Sufism. So Ali is a son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad and a cousin of Prophet Muhammad. Yeah. So another quite lengthy academic quotation there on the importance of Ali, which is actually the Shias and the Sunnis and the Sufis actually share a common famous hadith that I am the city of knowledge and Ali is its gate. Yeah. So Ali being recommended as spiritual vicegerency or khilafah ruhaniyah according to the Sunni world, according to the Shia world, and also according to Sufism. Now, next slide. There are many other similarities between Sufism and Shiism and will be explained along this presentation. Thus, for this reason, I will only focus on salvation within Shia Islam, yeah, because it's nearer to Sufism. In Shiism, salvation comes with the idea of savior. So the first savior is none other than Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad. And as you can see from another quite lengthy quotation here, that the 12 Shias actually believe that Ali as a first Imam or first saint, and they follow up to 12 Imam, and the hidden one, or the expected, and the owner and possessor of time. In other words, the timeless. So these are actually what the Sufism, people who practice Sufism, has in common with Shiism. Now, this concept, next slide, of imamate, the one that that I've just explained in Shiism, also exists within Sufism with different term, wali kutub. So this concept comes from the idea that there are hierarchy amongst the saint themselves. So among the walis, waliullah, they are actually people who have their own rank. Yeah. So this is again another quite lengthy quotation from Arif Zamhari, which actually explains the rank of this saint. Yeah. So we have Akhyar, for example, Abdal, Abrar, Autat, Anuqaba, the chiefs. And the highest one is actually the axis or pole or kutub, which is actually wali kutub, the idea of, or the concept of wali kutub that I've noted earlier. So plural is aktab or ghaus, which means the one who gives help, yes, source of help. Now, the next slide. This idea on imamate or sainthood within Shiism give birth to the broader concept of walayat, which can also be found within Sufism. So what is walayat? Yeah, in Islam in general, according to Sayyid Hussein Nas, and Sufism in particular, a saint is called a wali, and sanctity is called wilayah. So in Shiism, the whole function of the imam is associated with the power and function of what is Persian is called walayat, and which comes from the same root as wilayah and is closely connected with it. Now, as stated earlier, this idea of sainthood and imam also translated as wali kutub. Yeah. So interesting enough, the wali kutub can be traced back to Ali. Sort of like the Sufis and the Shias are actually sharing the same saints. Yeah. Only that the Shias consider them as imam and the Sufis consider them as saints or wali kutub. So when we trace back to Ali, it is Ali the one that fulfilled all the criteria above, all the criteria on the sainthood. So according to Sayyid Hussein Nas, this is another striking similarities between Sufism and Shiism. Next slide. Now, this is another quite a lengthy academic quotation here. So let me just summarize it. So the kutub and this imam are also actually, in a way, referring to the same person, yeah, Insan al-Kamil or universal man, which is actually expounded by Ibn Arabi, is very similar to the Shi doctrine of the kutub and the imam. This is important for us to understand Ibn Arabi because later on, to understand Hamza Fansuri, Ibn Arabi presence or visibility in his works are very strong. Next slide. Well, another dominant belief in Shiism is intercession. By intercession, the Shias believe that Prophet Muhammad, his household, and the Imams are guided, reference, and the most important is the real savior. Now, next slide. Now, it is significant to note here that the doctrine of Ali and intercession are also common within the Sufis. In this regard, the Shias and the Sufis share same spiritual references from Ali until the 8th Shia Imam, yeah, Wali Kutub. Sayyid Hussein Nas, however, note that the link are still intact between school of thoughts. So in order to understand it, the Sufis and the Shias actually share the same Wali Kutub openly up until Imam Ali Rida within the Shiism, the 8th Imam. However, it does not mean that the Sufis are actually just letting go the concept of Wali Kutub of Imamate, but in fact, it is because the special conditions prevailing at that time, they remain silent in these matters. Yeah, in fact, to this day, Imam Ali Rida, for example, is considered as the Imam of initiation, and many Persians who seek a spiritual master and initiation into Sufism go to his tomb in Mashhad, Iran. So this we can found in Hafiz Shirazi's poetries, for example. Now, next slide. Sayyid Hussein Nas further added that Shiism and Sufism then possess a common parentage in that they are both linked with the esoteric dimension of the Islamic revelation and India's earliest history were inspired by the same sources. Yeah. Now, as I have explained in length, next slide, the meaning of Sufism and the practitioners or the Sufis themselves by Sufi poetry, in this particular presentation, it will simply indicate a product of art or literary expressions by the Sufis. Now, earlier, I have bring the attention that according to a scholar, Rabia Shamsuddin Qazi from India, actually, Sufism, or rather the Sufis, are religious people promoting not just monotheism, but more important, they champion equality, fraternity, and social justice. Now, for instance, love and fraternity is dominant theme in Jalaluddin Rumi's work. For example, from this verse is very visible. Light up a fire of love in your soul, burn away thoughts and words totally. Lovers have to burn every moment, for taxes and thithers are not imposed on a ruined village. There exists no formalities of Kaaba within Kaaba, and what does it matter is a diver has no snowshoes. Do not seek guidance from intoxicated lovers. Why do you ask about repairing your clothes from those own garments are torn? Religion of love is different from all religion. Lovers' religion or belief is God. Now, according to Erkan Türkmen, a very famous scholar on Islamic mysticism from Turkey, the verse above explains how love is beyond religions or nationalities. This is through a love or brotherhood that another human rights principle, the equality, can be achieved. Now, next slide, another visible verse by Rumi is quoted by Türkmen in his work. So you can have a look, a quick look for it. For example, while I'll keep explaining about it. Yeah. So from this verse, this particular verse, Erkan Türkmen explains this verse by giving a lot of attention to the concept of love promoted by Rumi. It is means by of love that you can get rid of worldly worries, and its greatness brings all disputes to an end. Yeah, love is above the religious conflicts, and it looks meaningless when you attain God's proximity. But to reach the stage, you need religious disciplines. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. Rumi avoided political conflict during his time and make his stand known. That the worst of scholars is he who accepts helps from emirs of chieftains and whose welfare and salvation is dependent on and stems from the fear of them. Now, by focusing on his Sufistic doctrines, Rumi enabled love, equality, and social justice among the people and his followers. Meanings, if you look into Rumi's works, yeah, beyond the symbolism, for example, beyond the wines, yeah, beyond of love, a lot of love expression in his works, is not just about proximity or nearness to God. It's not just about prayer and supplications. It's more than that. Yeah, the same can be found. Next slide. From Hamzah Fansuri verse of Syair, Rahman itulah yang bernama wujud. You can read this translation there. Keadaan Tuhan yang sedia ma'bud, kenyataan Islam, Nasrani dan Yahud dari Rahman itulah sekalian mawjud. Now, obviously we can see that according to Fansuri, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism came into being because of that mercifulness. Now, C.S. Knott, next slide, in his endnote written as Epilogue for the Conference of the Birds, a very famous book, important work by Faruddin Attar, asserted how Sufism rejects seeds of complex simply by focusing inner spirituality. Yeah, so the Sufi says that almost everyone is born with possibilities for inner development, but that his parents and those around him make him a Jew, a Christian, a Hindu, or a magician, and he soon acquires prejudices and accepts what others say with no regard to his own experience or reasoning, and this becomes a stumbling block. Now, love here, you need to understand, is being dominant expressed in Sufistic works are also defined as ishq, or extreme love, or intense love. Muhammad Ligahausen, next slide. For instance, note how love in Sufi's poem are not really about physical passions or carnal desire, but broader than imagined, as love here are accurately about the most lofty human sentiments like ishq for knowledge and ishq for service to society. Yeah. Now, let's have a look to our own famous great Sufi poet from Malay world, from Malay archipelago. Now, Hamzah Fansuri. Hamzah Fansuri is quite very well known, and it's so important for us also to understand that he actually propagated Wujudiyah philosophy, where he actually learned from Persian intellectuals residing in Ayutthaya in the 7th century. It's also important to understand that Wujudiyah doctrine is rejected by Sunnism. That's why in certain instances you will find that Hamzah Fansuri's works being condemned by certain religious establishment. Now, according to Muhammad Ismail Marcinkowski in his work, and also Anthony Wright in Southeast Asia in the Age of Commerce, 1450-1680, Hamzah Fansuri is quite being influenced by these Persian intellectuals from Ayutthaya. Yeah. And next slide. According to Indonesian Shia Council, they stress that Fansuris are heavily influenced by Shiism, and most probably he himself is Shia. So this notion that Fansuri being linked to Shiism is also being held by my colleague from Atma, actually, Muhammad Shukri Yo, a scholar from my institute, in his talk presented in 2015, that according to Shukri, Fansuri is often labeled as deviant by Malaysia's religious establishment, and mainstream Islam as Fansuri worldview are considered close to Shiism. Now, next slide. Let's look into his work, Fansuri's work. Okay, as stated previously, my take on Sufism is that it is soteriology. So according to Fansuri, Ali is the one who owns the divine knowledge or makrifah. Yeah, because we stress on importance of Ali as wali kutub, or a saint that being shared by the Sufism, by the Sufis and by the Shias. Now, Ali can be found visibly in Fansuri works. Yeah, there are so many verses. For example, Tuhan kita itu tiada baik, terhampir pulang daripada hab al-warid, wasilnya daim terlalu syahid pada ahlul ma'rifah yang beroleh syahid. You can look at the translation on the slides. Next slide. Nah, syahid itulah yang bernama wali, beroleh makrifat daripada Muhammad al-Nabi. Makrifat itu juga diketahui supaya jadi syuja seperti Ali. Now, that is the knowledge you should have in order to become a gallant hero like Ali. I will explain later on about this gallant hero. Yeah. Now, next slide. Aho, segala kita yang bernama awam, juga kau turut makrifat yang tamam, kerana makrifat itu hakikat kalam, menyampaikan kita ke dar as-salam. Next slide. Makrifat itulah yang terlalu ajib, akan pakaian wali yang beroleh nasib, barang mengetahui dia menjadi habib, kepada Rabbul Alamin manzilnya karib. Next slide. Wali itulah yang menurut firman, menyembah Tuhan seperti kata Quran, tandanya wasil lagi dan burhan, memakai pakaian dan sentiasa urian. Next slide. Ajib sekali akan orang batin, dakwanya urian daim berkain, mainnya itulah sempurna main, dengan dirinya urian tiada dengan lain. Next slide. Urian inilah yang dipakai Nabi dan Asadullah baginda Ali. Urian inilah juga kau ketahui, maknanya dapat tauhid mukawi. Now from all these verse actually, Fansuri trying to explain that Ali as the wali kutub or the saint, or the pole, the axis pole, is actually the gate of knowledge. So it's important for you to arrive salvation through a proper savior, that is Ali. I will come back to this soteriology or savior. Yeah. Now, Fansuri, next slide, often praises Imam Ali's noble virtues, and this can be picked from his works as quoted here. Barang siapa kepada sifatnya sahih, beroleh waris daripada baginda Ali, mereka itu yang bakhilnya kawi, manakan dapat menjadi wali. Next slide. Sabda Rasul al-Sahih Habibullah, yakni yang sahih itu waliullah. Nah, wali ya, saint. Barang siapa bakhil daim ba'in Allah, dunia akhirat ia aduullah. Ya. Now, Fansuri often cited Imam Ali as the leader of the believers, and this is pretty much dominant throughout his works. Next slide. Dalil ini dibawa Imam Al-Muttaqin, yakni fatawakkalu in kuntum mu'minin, jika tawakkulmu kepada Arhamar Rahimin, makanya dapat ke dalam kaumul sabirin. Next slide. sabda Abu Hasan Ali Al-Murtada, Ali again, qala man tawakkala ala ilahi kafa, daripada dalil Quran, jangan kau tawa supaya dapat ke dalam jannatul ma'wa. Nah, if you can have, first is impression actually, Fansuri works are quite laden, quite heavy with a lot of phrases from Arabic, yeah. Now, look at this verse, sabda Abu Hasan Ali Al-Murtada, qala man tawakkala ala ilahi kafa. Yeah, next slide. Another important perspective is that Imam Ali is considered the real wali kutub or central saint, as have been discussed, as have been explained earlier. Nah, akan fasik itu azabnya syadid, dihancurkan daim, dijadikan jadid, dan pada sekalian muttaqi jalannya baik, tiada ia dapat menjadi Abdul Al-Hamid. Ya, next slide. Ruwi'an Ali Ibnu Abi Talib, zina dan haram racun yang maha ghalib, daripada pekerjaan itu tiada engkau taib, manakah wasil nyawamu dengan qalib. Next slide. Qala illahu ta'ala, pada sekalian muslimin, juga kau taubat daripada dosamu ajma'in, hafazkan inna ilaha yuhibbut tawabin, supaya masuk ke dalam makna al-mutatahhirin. Ya. Next slide. Imam Ali in Fansuri works, Hamzah Fansuri works, are also often being illustrated as someone free from any being except the Almighty God. Kekasihmu zahir terlalu terang, pada kedua alam ternyata terbentang, ahlul al-ma'rifah terlalu menang, wasilnya daim tiada berselang. Next slide. You can look at the translation, yeah, if you can't understand the Malay verses. Hapuskan akal dan rasamu, lenyapkan badan dan nyawamu, pejamkan hendak kedua matamu, sana kau lihat permai rupamu. Next slide. Adamu itu juga kau serang, supaya dapat negeri yang henang, seperti Ali tatkala perang, melepaskan dul-dul tiada berkekang. Now, let me explain all this citation or quotation on Ali. From those verses being presented, Fansuri's dominant view is Ali is the savior and the right guidance for all believers. Yeah. Now, being referred as the only suitable model, it is important to note that Ali is not only regarded as spiritual man and savior, but also as someone championing social justice. Now, there's a layer upon layer. Yeah. So there are verses from Hamzah Fansuri works that indicate this point visibly. As Sufis are people who, next slide, yeah. As Sufis are people, next slide, please. Ahu segala, no, earlier one, previous one. All right. Being referred as the only suitable model, it's important to know that Ali is not only regarded as spiritual man, and as Sufis, people who taking care of their proximity towards God Almighty, this proximity can be achieved through avoiding committing sins. Yeah, we can see from Fansuri's verses. However, sins are not just adultery and theft, as mentioned by Fansuri. Another sin often ignored is being cooperative with corrupt and unjust government, yeah, establishment. These points can be detected from these verses. Can we have another slide, please? Next one. Next one. Yeah, it's this one, I think. Ahu segala yang menjadi fakir, jangan bersubat dengan raja dan amir, kerana Rasulullah Basha dan Nadir melarangkan kita sagir dan kabir. Oh, all ye that have taken the vow of poverty, do not befriend princes and rulers, for the messenger of God bring out of joyful tidings and warnings, has forbidden these to both the small and the great among us. Next slide. And another verse, quite important one. Ahu segala kamu anak alim, jangan bersahabat dengan orang zalim, kerana Rasulullah sempurna hakim, melarangkan kita sekalian khadim. Oh, all ye that are all pious family, do not befriend the oppressors, for God messengers, the highest authority has forbidden these to us, his servants. Thus, Fansuri, by stressing Ali, he is suggesting that Ali is indeed a model, a guidance, a reference that avoid a corrupt establishment. Next slide. Fansuri, to note, leaves during Sultan Iskandar Muda Mahkota Alam reigning Aceh in between 1606-1636, whom is known for his corrupt and unjust administration. Now, another important aspect in Sufism and can be identified, next slide, in Fansuri poems is the futuwa. Yeah. Now, according to Muhammad Ibn Hussein Aisulami, what is futuwa? A simple meaning of futuwa is chivalry. However, futuwa means a lot more than that. Yeah. If among the audience have read one of my novel, 1511 Combat, 1511 H Combat, actually I discuss the concept of futuwa in that particular novel. So what is futuwa? Now look at the length, quite a long quotation there. Now, so once Imam Ali has almost killed his enemy, yeah, someone, enemy warrior. This is in the battlefield. But this particular enemy spit or spat in his face, yeah? And because of that, Sayyidina Ali put his dagger. He just couldn't kill this enemy. And this particular enemy asked him, so why? I mean, like, I'm now helpless and I insulted you. Why you release me? Sayyidina Ali answered, it is aroused the anger of my ego. Had I killed you, then it would not have been for the sake of Allah, but for the sake of my ego. I would have been a murderer. You are free to go. So according to Muhammad Ibn al-Hussein al-Sulami, the enemy warrior moved by the integrity displayed in Hazrat Ali and converted to Islam on the spot. This particular incident here, it tells a lot of that futuwa. It's not just chivalry, but discipline, integrity, respecting human rights, brotherhood, love, equality, and justice. That Sufism is not only about bravery, but also other good virtues. Next slide. Now, futuwa, if you look at just a simple meaning, is chivalry, if I said, or people link it to military organization, yeah, sort of like a scout in modern day today. But actually, it's more than being a scout, yeah, because this concept of futuwa is visible in Fansuri's mind. For instance, Fansuri cites Shuja or Imam Ali's heroic trait. Next slide. Remember this verse earlier. Syahid itulah yang bernama wali, beroleh makrifat daripada Muhammad al-Nabi. Makrifat itu juga diketahui supaya jadi syuja seperti Ali. Now, this syuja, bravery, is not just suffice to define as bravery here. In fact, in another verse, Fansuri tries his best to explain that futuwa transcends the art of warfare. Next slide. Hamzah Fansuri anak dagang, daim bersubat dengan hulu balang, penuh dan pepak tahu berperang, barang kerjanya jangan kau larang. Next slide. Biarkan laskar dan pawai lenyapkan harta dan sakai, tark al-dunia juga yang kau rasai, makanya dapat tiada kau lalai. Have done with soldiery and pageantry, dispense with money and bondment, do your utmost to retire from this world, then you may grow regardful. So futuwa is another concept that proves that Sufism is not restricted to divine engagement with God, the hereafter, but also touch upon the most important aspects of our life, this world, the time we are living now. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Conclusion. Yeah. I would like to end this presentation. I've taken a lot of time with a short verse written by Shams at-Tabrizi. Shams at-Tabrizi is actually the mentor of Maulana Rumi. Yeah, people quite often read Rumi, but they just neglect Tabrizi. Very important figure, actually. Every corruption that has appeared in the world appeared because someone believed in someone else on the basis of imitation, or he denied on the basis of imitation. Thank you very much for this opportunity to explain on Sufism and Sufi poetry. Yeah, back to Singapore. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Faizal, for that very rich sharing. I think he has very nicely set up the platform for us to dive into the discussion of individual poets. Okay, so with that, let us dive deeper into the discussion with our panelists, who will explore the works and impact of three prominent poets from Southeast Asia and South Asia. So we have three panelists with us today who will each present on a poet. And after the discussion by the three panelists, we'll have a short Q&A session. So our first speaker will be Ahalla Tsauro. Ahalla is a first-year master's candidate at the NUS Department of Malay Studies. Prior to this, he has studied at Universitas Airlangga and worked as a research assistant at Stratagem Indonesia. During his undergraduate years, he contributed to writing chapters for books like Indonesia in Changing Southeast Asia and Journal of Indonesia Center for Middle East Studies. Ahalla Tsauro will highlight the embedded spiritual traditions of Java as attested by one of the greatest and the last court poet and mystic of the Javanese court in the 19th century, Rongo Wasito. The life of ethical commitment, deep contemplation with strong connection with the surroundings and tradition has been one of Rongo Wasito's legacy. Let us now invite Ahalla to begin his discussion. Ahalla, please.
Thank you, Sheikh. Let me share my screen. Is it clear, my voice? Okay. Okay. Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ahalla Tsauro. I'm from Indonesia, as Sheikh introduced before. And today I'm about to deliver a little bit about Rongo Warsito, entitled The Poem of Rongo Warsito and Javanese Mysticism. And before I start, I would like to deliver a quick gratitude to the organizer for the Poetry Festival and especially the Ocean Sufi Poetry. I'm very excited to be here. And okay, let's start with the Rongo Warsito. Who is he and what he has done and what poems makes him great and other things. Okay, basically the complete name of the Rongo Warsito in numerous literary work is Raden Ngabehi Rongo Warsito. Basically, this is the title, Raden Ngabehi and Rongo Warsito. Even he himself is Rongo Warsito III. He is around in 1800, specifically in 1802 and 1873, living in the era of the Dutch colony and also some sultanate in Java. When he was young, he was called Bagus Burham, and he growing up in a family of Yasadipura that notorious with the poetry and poem and some descendants to the Majapahit kingdom. And one of the works by Drawers also noticed many things about the Rongo Warsito life and also how his ideas encapsulated within the works he has done before. And during his childhood and when he was young, around age until 12, he was studied outside of his place. He lived in central Java, but he studied in East Java. And during that time, he studied about mysticism and also religious values in boarding school, or people know it as a pesantren. Okay, next. So by the time he growing up, there are many people that influence Rongo Warsito to do and to work and to produce memorable piece of works. And one of the four is Tanujaya. When he was young, he is a representation of normal people, ordinary people, or in our term we call it Wong Cili, or small people. And also he learned about the religions and also theology and anything related to the religious teaching to Kiai Imam Besari, one of the religious leader or religious figure in Ponorogo in East Java. So he studied about literature from his grandfather, Yasadipura, and also some from Pangeran Haryabuminata, he studied about how to uphold justice, how to self-respect the others. And these four is some of the figure that I noted from the resources that might influence Ronggo Warsito when he growing up and produced many books. And then according to some resources like Simo and others, and less than 60 book titles he has made, and covering many issues and many field of work stemming from philosophy, story tales, literature, language, and education, and many others. And during his writing, he write many others kind of Javanese literature. If we would like to scrutinize first, there were a work from Sartono Kartodirjo, which he explained about protests in a rural movement in rural Java. And one of the idea of Sartono Kartodirjo also, some of it get influenced from the idea of the story from Ronggo Warsito that he put into the poets. So the works like Wirid, Hidayati, Serat, and other things, and there are many others Javanese literature like Primbon. But what I would like to deliver here is called Serat. Serat is like one of the Javanese literary works that contain a mix of traditional teaching, mysticism, and religious element. And some of Serat also, some scholar noted that there is the element of syncretism in explaining the Java mysticism, because there is a mix between religious teaching of Islam, Hindu, and Buddhism in Javanese soil. So first of all, the works of Ronggo Warsito that I would like to present is Serat Jakalodang. Serat Jakalodang is one of the works by Ronggo Warsito that express the value of upholding justice, social responsibility, the concept of justice. If we see from the title, Jakalodang itself is a character, not a character within the story inside this poem. Let me read first. Ronggeh jelek tumibo, gagaran santoso, wartani meh teko, sikara karodo tatage kantakon. So one of the point that I mentioned earlier about the social responsibility, how to respond to the current situation, is like what Ronggo Warsito mentioned in this in this verse. So the situation of the context at that time in Dutch colony, and also the administration that may be corrupt or have a negative point of view by them, is also portrayed by what he has written in this. And also the other verse, like he criticized what happened in society, especially the ruling class, and also the man that would like to be good, but otherwise appearing to be different. Like the first, Wong alim alim pulasan, jobo putih joro kuning. That it looked like it white from outside, but it's yellow from the inside. It's like to interpret uniquely from Ronggo Warsito. And then the work by Ronggo Warsito others is like Serat Kalatida, Serat Kolotido in Javanese terms. And this is very notorious among Indonesian scholars because it translated to Zaman Edan. Kolotido is the crazy period of times. So he explained, it is written in 1860. Kolotido is written in 1860, and it expresses more or less about what the hierarchy within society, what people, what the society, what we have to react to the society, which corrupt or injustices. So at first he mentioned about the hierarchy within society, like mentioned ratu ni ratu utama, pati patih luwih, pranaya katias raharjo, manekare becik-becik, paranidene tandadi palia singkala bendu, mandar makin andadra, rubeda angrabedi, beda-beda ardane. So this is like, I just remind what Dr. Faizal mentioned about Shams Tabrizi when he responds about the society and also the imitation, like Ronggo Warsito mentioned also in the next verse about amenangi zaman edan, awuh oyo ing pambudi melu edan ora tahan, yen tan milu ang lakoni. So is it like the crazy situation within a society is like people following each other, because when condition is such that if you don't participate and people don't get anything from that, so that's why one of the calamity or the problem within a society is also recorded by Ronggo Warsito at that time, maybe still relevant, and some politician or some scholars still refer to this famous verse. So next, there is also Surat Wirid Hidayati, and this part is really connected to the idea of Javanese mysticism and also Islam Sufism, as he mentioned notoriously about the idea of Manunggaling Kawula Gusti, or in the idea of Hamzah Fansuri, it can be derived from Wahdatul Wujud, or maybe Al-Halaj when he said Ana al-Haq. So the idea of Ronggo Warsito, when he translated and also manifested into the own idea, it gives a birth to the authentic Javanese Sufism style. So the idea of the unity of existence from the God, but in the end, Simo also emphasized that the idea of what he wrote within Wirid Hidayati is the emphasization of the theocentric aspect and also anthropocentric aspect, which is divinity and humanity, which always Javanese Sufism pay attention to. And the last works of Ronggo Warsito I put here is Sarat Pamoring Kawula Gusti. In this sarat, I don't put any example of it, but I only extract the idea of what Sarat Pamoring Kawula Gusti extracted from it. Basically, this is this sarat or this work from Ronggo Warsito expresses how the manners, how the etiquette of people, or in a context of many famous Sufi scholar like Ibn Arabi, it is like an interpretation of ihsan, when people do a good deeds to the other people. So these 7 points is like how people control their body, their mind, their patience. So in terms of to make people to love each other, as to make a good deed and then share love toward other people, like Rumi said about religion of love or mahabbah. So in some sense, that Ronggo Warsito extracted one point to another to share that this Javanese works, this Javanese literary works also contains the idea that connected to the other mysticism works. And okay, still wrong, right? Sheikh, okay. The Javanese mysticism, in this context, what Heidelberg expressed, and also some word from Simo, is the idea of syncretism, because all the religious teaching, all the religious traditions and norms from other places that reach in Java soil, it give a birth to a new interpretations of the syncretism. But the main thing is about how the experience of practicing like what they have done, like doing a repetitive prayer, fasting, sleeping, and deprivation and withdrawal from the world, is like the idea of make himself to be a good one. And the purpose of asceticism is being purification, facilitating direct communication with the divine world. And it just remind me of what Haida Bagir mentioned when it comes to mysticism, that the point and the core is value of peace and inclusiveness, which ultimately tells people to be united and not tolerant. So to sum up what the poem of Ronggo Warsito and the idea of Javanese mysticism, there were some points of what the scope of Javanese ethic that become a manifestation of the idea of what we have been discussed before. It is about the factors like the ritual tradition, tata krama susila, supernatural thing, and mysticism, in which these four topics is like, these 4 points is like the manifestation and also how to understanding society and what's point from them we can take. Like ritual tradition is the manifestation of what Javanese society did, and they believe that this is not only about the divinity but also the humanity, and also the manners of etiquette, as it shows to the people how to share the love and as a social responsibility to others. Supernatural things like the recognition of the unseen, so they can do whatever to the society in the good deeds, but not still maintain the good relationships to what happens with the divinity. And in the end, this mysticism, Javanese mysticism, is like a spiritual path or way of life that people of a Java community has been practices for a long time, that it can be denied that it can also, it extracted the idea of Sufism from the other people, other place, the traditions that reached to Java and interpreted to a new form or a different interpretation of Javanese mysticism in Java. So in the end, here it is the works of Ronggo Warsito that you might, if you're curious about Ronggo Warsito more, this is some of Ronggo Warsito works that you can dig it more about Hidayat Jati, Pujangga Ronggo Warsito, and Zaman Edan. Maybe this what I can explain. Okay, thank you, Sheikh. I give it back to you.
All right, thank you, Ahalla, for that wonderful sharing. So for our next speaker, we have Saddiq Basha, a year 4 undergraduate majoring in political science at the National University of Singapore. So his interest lies in the socio-historical and political development of societies surrounding the Indian Ocean. Saddiq Basha will showcase Sufi poetry articulated by Bulleh Shah of Panjan, North India. His mystical poetry is both spiritual as it is educative, which could be best understood as part of the struggle to attain equality, dignity, unity, and healing in the world of dissension and mistrust. Saddiq, please.
Thank you, Sheikh. Let me just share my screen. All right. So thank you so much. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So today I will be exploring some of the literary works of an 18th century Punjabi Sufi poet and philosopher, Syed Abdullah Shah Qadri, or better known as Bulleh Shah. So I will first begin by providing the historical background of both Bulleh Shah and poetic expression in the context of South Asia, before diving into some of his Kafi poetry and analyzing how the ideas embedded within these poems are highly relevant in our contemporary world. So at this point, some of you might be asking, how could this 18th century figure would possibly have any insights into our complex modern world today? So to that, I will reply with a quote from German philosopher Hegel, who once said, what experience and history teach us is this, that nations and governments have never learned from anything from history or acted upon any lessons they might have drawn from it. So in the context of Sufi poetry, what this quote suggests to me is that history often repeats itself and that society at times fail to recognize the value and relevance of our past. So this includes our spiritual traditions. So when one looks back at the lifetime of Bulleh Shah, we see that the region of Punjab was in a state of decline. It went through the short-lived reigns of multiple Mughal emperors and invasions. This coupled with the rise of Punjabi Sikhs who were contesting for power against the increasingly oppressive Mughal Empire. There was a lot of substantial economic and socio-political ramifications for the region. So there was increasing intercommunal intolerance and violence amongst the different religious communities in Punjab. So as a keen observer of his society, Bulleh Shah's literary work addresses both the problems and the potential antidotes. And hence, in today's context, I feel that what we are witnessing is similar patterns emerging in various societies around the world, where exclusivism in the form of race, religion, and class are ever visible and divisive. So hopefully the works of Bulleh Shah could serve as a timely reminder for all of us. So I hope that my humble attempt at sharing the works and views of Bulleh Shah could at least prompt us to reflect. So Bulleh Shah, born Syed Abdullah Shah Qadri, is considered one of the greatest poets from South Asia. So popularly dubbed as the Rumi of Punjab, his poetry is widely recognized for his universality. The widespread appeal of his message across the various religious communities in South Asia has led him to be called the portable Bulleh Shah. This, however, has led to what is called the politics of interpretation, where different communities attempt to claim and categorize him within their respective religious frameworks, when in reality, due to the lack of historical evidence, there is no definitive consensus on his life and worldview. Most of what is known about him today is pieced together from whatever poetry that can be verified to belong to him, local folklore and anecdotes. But what we do know is that Bulleh Shah is believed to be born in 1680 in his ancestral village in Bahawalpur during the reign of the 6th Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. So he was born in a Sayyid family. He received strict Orthodox Islamic education, and which involves the study of the Quran, Islamic legal tradition, and Persian Sufi literary tradition as well. So upon completing his studies, and this is the important part, right? He set out to Lahore, and that is where he discovered his mentor, Shah Inayat Qadri, who he attributes for his own spiritual attainment. So the poet encounters humility, right? So as with most of his biography, there is no definitive information of how he actually met his mentor. But what we do know is that it was a transformative experience for him, and that it will go on to shape his subsequent views and literary works. Hence, to discuss Bulleh Shah, I think one needs to understand the impact that his mentor Shah Inayat had on him. So let me just tell a quick story, right? The tale of the gardener and the mango tree, how Bulleh Shah met his mentor. So, so one of such traditions, there are multiple stories to this, right? But this, the more popular and most recounted version narrates how Bulleh Shah met Shah Inayat by chance in Lahore. So he was exploring this garden called Shalima Garden when he came across a mango tree. So, and you know, he was quite hungry and he wanted to eat the fruits, but he couldn't find any caretaker to ask permission, right? So afraid of the sin of stealing, he uttered the phrase, Allah Ghani, meaning God the self-sufficient, and a ripe fruit fell from the tree. He did this several times and he started collecting the mangoes to eat. So then Shah Inayat, he then came across Shah Inayat, who accused him of stealing the fruits. Not realizing that the identity of the gardener, Bulleh Shah replied with a leveled superiority that he had not stolen the fruit and that the fruit had come to him. So he repeated his act to demonstrate, right? But Shah Inayat was not impressed and informed the poet that he had been mispronouncing Allah Ghani, right? So Shah Inayat then uttered the phrase, and all the ripe fruits fell. And when he repeated it, all the fruits went back up on the tree. So yeah, that's why this is more, part of the local folklore, right? So at this point, Bulleh Shah was so ashamed of his initial superiority over whom he assumed to be a common gardener that he subsequently pleaded to become his disciple. So I think this story, though lengthy, I think it's very important in understanding how Bulleh Shah, what Bulleh Shah's views are, right? Or how it will go on to be. So it's important to note that Shah Inayat hailed from an Arayan family, a caste that was considered to be socially inferior to the Sayyids. So furthermore, Bulleh Shah's attachment to Shah Inayat was looked down upon his own family. So he received a lot of backlash from his family and from his own caste. And this was recorded by the mystic himself. So in this kafi on the right-hand side, if you look at it, it goes, the kafi poem goes, to admonish Bulleh came his sister and sister-in-laws. Abide by our advice and leave the hem of the Arayan skirt. Why have you brought disgrace to the Prophet and to the progeny of Ali? Let anyone who calls me a Sayyid be punished with the tortures of hell, and let him revel in the pleasures of heaven who labels me an Arayan. So Bulleh Shah's denouncement of this classist mentality is a reaction against his own social setting in the 18th century in light of the religious tensions that had begun to take hold. So despite there being coexistence of different religious communities in Punjab and the wider South Asia, social stratification amongst each religious community was very prevalent, with identity narratives being grounded in these social structures. So, for example, the caste system was an important one. It was perceived by many to be important, and it was a form of differentiation and identification. But for Bulleh Shah, such social restraints went against the notions of egalitarianism and universalism, which led to self-purification, right? And this is an important concept in Sufi philosophical thought. And since it promoted egoistic thinking and superiority. So the poet's strong stance against this social divide can clearly be seen in this poem. So before I dive right into other Kafi poems, right, let me just talk about poetic expression in South Asia and the development of Kafi poetry. So poetic expression in the Indian subcontinent, particularly in Punjab, is strongly rooted in local traditions, specifically folkloric poetry. So folk songs have long served as a repository of local culture, beliefs, social structures, and response to historical change. So from the mundane, everyday mundane to celebratory occasions, these songs depicts the rich heritage of Punjab and provides an illustrious image of rural life of the common person. So Bulleh Shah's poetry draws a lot from this tradition, allowing him to effectively convey his beliefs and ideas to the common people. So specifically, Bulleh Shah is known to have written in a lyrical form called Kafi, a popular style of poetic composition amongst Punjabi poets and notables. So this includes the likes of Baba Farid and even Guru Nanak, right? So it specifically refers to a distinct literary genre with a mono-rhyme stanzaic verse form, usually set to music or regional folk melodies. So it's very often, if you look at the picture on the left, where you have Qawwali performances, so they will use poems such as the poems by Bulleh Shah, and people will sit down, gather and listen. And it's very relatable to the point that, you know, people can absorb these ideas really easily. So the literary choice of Kafi poetry is often reflective of the ordinary populace, as it utilizes idioms and phrases of the locale, right? So this includes common activities such as the spinning of cotton yarn and local tropes such as the Radha Krishna romance. So with that said, let's dive right into his work and uncover some of the values. So as mentioned earlier, Bulleh Shah was a keen observer of his society, and arguably he was unafraid to kind of criticize and challenge the ruling and religious elites of his day. In particular, he was disturbed by the influence held by certain notable figures of the Naqshbandi Sufi order over the Mughal rulers' political affair, which created the influence of this order over the political affairs, right, of the day, created a very hostile environment. So both Muslims, typically those that are deemed deviant or a threat to the prevailing religious norms of the period, and non-Muslims alike were affected by this atmosphere. So hence, it is against this hostile environment that Bulleh Shah composed his works in an attempt to kind of counter an increasingly overbearing nature of society at that point of time, right? So one of such poems that we can see such ideas is his famous poem, which is called Makke Gaya Gal Mukdi Nahi, going to Makkah is not the ultimate, right? Which deals with the dichotomy of empty rituals and inner spiritualism across the religious boundaries of society. So in this poem, he urged people to cultivate the essence of their soul, inner spirituality, rather than blindly performing the rituals and practices of religious traditions. So the poem, do note, I'm not proficient in Punjabi, so I'm not going to read the original one. I'm just going to read it in English. So, by going to Makkah, the mystery is not solved, so long the ego is not annihilated. By going to the Ganga, the mystery is not solved, though you may take 100 dips into it. By going to Gaya, the mystery is not solved, though you may offer many rice cakes at funerals. Oh Bulleh, the mystery will be solved only when the I is completely eliminated. So here, Bulleh Shah explicitly mentions the sites of ritualistic significance from the dominant religious traditions of the region. So for Muslims, Mecca is the holy site where pilgrimage to the Kaaba is performed. For Hindus, the Ganga River is a sacred site for physical purification and spiritual cleansing. And likewise, the Gaya temple, where Buddha is said to have attained enlightenment, is known to be an important pilgrimage site for Buddhists. So by targeting each holy site, Bulleh Shah is arguing that there is no achievement in performing these pilgrimages if the ego of self remains, right? So to him, while each site represents a place of inner purification and spiritual enlightenment, a dependence on these rituals is not enough to achieve the level of spirituality intended in these respective traditions. Rather, the removal of ego and self-superiority is vital for an absolute religious experience, a notion arguably part of the foundation of pilgrimages themselves, right? So as such, the poem highlights the universal criteria for fulfilling religious obligations, which is the struggle of the self transcends religious boundaries and divides. So as hinted in the previous segment, a major leitmotif or recurring theme throughout Bulleh Shah's literary work is that of pluralism, right? So pluralism here refers to a twofold system, wherein it first recognizes and validates diversity, and subsequently presumes that there are certain religious truths that are prevalent across different religious systems, right? So hence one could argue that Sufism possesses this healing aspect, one that could serve as a means of promoting and forging pluralism. So specifically the promotion of pluralism allows for various communities to better understand their practices and beliefs through developing an appreciation of other traditions. It allows for an enriching experience of diversity as narratives of similarity and differences are perpetuated in the search for the ultimate truth with a capital T. So such a concept to me is discussed in this poem called Ki Jana Me Kaun, Who Knows Who I Am, which explores the trivial nature of religious divide set by society. While the poem may be perceived as a rejection of religious affiliation as a whole, to me, Bulleh Shah's message penetrates deeper than such superficial readings, right? So as he claims in the poem, "Oh Bulleh, what do I know who I am? I am not among believers seen in mosques, nor am I versed in the traditions of unbelief. I am not among the pious, nor among the sinful. I am neither Moses, nor am I a Pharaoh. Oh Bulleh, what do I know who I am?" So from the excerpt, Bulleh Shah refused to socially categorize himself, as he deemed it to be a form of feeding the ego, a sense of superiority over the other, right? So this is highlighted in his use of the dichotomous pairings, such as the words, belief, unbelief, or pious, sinful. So in a time where religious divides were festering amongst different communities, Bulleh Shah's rejection of in a sense, orthodoxy, right, at the point of time, was an attempt to present an alternative religiosity born by the way of the heart, which is a prominent Sufi teaching for the enriching of a universal spiritual experience available to all. Okay. All right. There's some issues with the slides, but it's okay. So this is my reflections and conclusions. It's very straightforward. I think that, so after doing this research, I think these are my two key takeaways, and I hope you can appreciate it. So to me, after looking through the poems, it kind of asks me, like, how do you say? To me, like, spiritual traditions, to me, is fundamental to our society, right? Because it possesses a healing capacity, one that could counter the prevalent sense of alienation, and it could promote our common and shared humanity. I think this is important, for us to kind of look back at our local traditions, whether it be in Singapore or the region or even beyond, right? I don't think it's necessary for us. It shouldn't just stop at Sufi poetry, but to look at one's spiritual traditions and see whether there are things that is common, that we can all celebrate. So that is one part. The second takeaway is that I think the poems highlighted to me how the use of literary domain and devices to encapsulate one's thoughts continues to be a relevant medium, right? And it could become potent in influencing and shaping society for the better. So I think that moving forward, the literati should continue to fully utilize the medium to promote universal values of brotherhood, egalitarianism, and peace. Yeah. With that, thank you so much. I will pass my time back to Sheikh. Thank you.
Thank you, Saddiq, for the wonderful sharing. So finally, we have Ahmad Ubaidillah, a year 4 undergraduate majoring in Islamic law at the Yarmouk University, Jordan. His interest lies in the literature and poetry of the Malay archipelago. Ubaidillah will bring us through the famous Southeast Asian mystic Sheikh Hamzah Fansuri, whose shairs or poems has been read and elaborated throughout the region for centuries. The call for deepening of the inner self and the ways of attaining it has been one of the most eloquent poetic expressions in the Malay world. Ubaidillah, please.
Thank you, Sheikh, for the introduction. Let me I can't seem to share the screen. Well, because I think, I'm not made a co-host yet. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. It's okay. All right. Bismillah. Firstly, I would like to thank for allowing me the opportunity to present here today, and also thank you to Dr. for attending for attendance. This team on this project is beneficial and relevant, but including myself.
Okay, I think we are experiencing some technical difficulty on Ubaidillah's side. Please hold on for a while.
Yeah, sorry, Sheikh. Yeah, is it
Yeah,
okay already?
okay.
Can you hear
Yeah.
and see me?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
You're
sorry,
good, you're good.
my network.
Yeah, maybe you can try again.
Okay, is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thank
So
you.
sorry for just now. All right. So as I was saying, I think this topic is of utmost importance and relevance for us today, especially during the current pandemic. During this current pandemic, I think we should actually exert some effort in appreciating our literary arts, because I know that some of us might be yearning to travel out of Singapore, but I think to read is actually to be transported to a different time and place. So I hope you will oblige me today as I bring all of you back to the 16th and 17th century to reflect upon the poetry of a man called Hamzah Fansuri. I think Dr. Faizal already discussed some of his works just now. Yeah, we will be discussing about this poet here today. So this is the overview for my presentation today. I will be talking about the life of Hamzah Fansuri, and then I will be sharing certain lines from his poems, Syair Perahu and Rubai Hamzah Fansuri, and also a personal, my personal takeaways from his poetry that I think is relevant with our current context. All right, very well. So I think just like with any other works of poetry, I think it's important for us to know the birthplace of the poet, the background of the poet, where he lived, and also who were the rulers of his time, what was the state of his society. And it's because through knowing all of this, will we be able to gain deeper insight into their works. And the same goes for Hamzah Fansuri as well. So if you look at this, the line of poetry that I wrote under the biography, Hamzah ni asalnya Fansuri mendapat wujud di tanah Syarnawi. So according to Sayyid Natib Alatas, this indicates that Hamzah was born in a town called Shaharnawi, which is present day Thailand, or people call it, it might be Ayutthaya as well, before returning to a place called Pancur Barus, which is in Aceh, and that is where he got his name, Fansuri. So Aceh at the time was the center of Islamic education. So it was a very vibrant city, bustling with trade and merchants and so on, and as well as having a mix of ethnicities such as Arabs and also Persians. So it's believed that Hamzah Fansuri lived during the 16th and 17th century, during the reign of Sultan Al-Aidin Riayat Shah, and also during the reign of Sultan Iskandar Muda. And it's believed that he was orphaned at a young age and was therefore forced to live as a wayfaring trader before being a Sufi. So Another interesting fact is that Hamzah is also regarded by some as the first poet in the Malay world. And according to Dr. Abdul Hadi's book, he is also deemed as a pioneer in Malay literature for using the Malay language for the first time in his in religious and spiritual writings. Not to mention that he also incorporated spiritual themes and linguistic styles that originate from Middle East. But there is also a question that that generates much curiosity, and that is the fact that no mention of his name can be found in any historical chronicles, such as the Sejarah Melayu, Sejarah Aceh, and so on. So to know this reason, we have to look deep into his legacy, and that is Hamzah Fansuri was not just a writer or a poet, but he is also deemed as a spiritual reformer during his time. And it's because of being a spiritual reformer that he antagonized certain groups in his society, such as the powerful and the wealthy, not to mention those who were practicing religion blindly or were seeking to achieve spirituality without a clear objective, and also with incorrect means. So another reason for his for the erasure of his name in the historical chronicles is because of his spiritual philosophy that he advocated, and that is the Wahdatul Wujud, or unity of being. So I mean, I would be unable to elaborate more on Wahdatul Wujud, especially due to the constraints of time. But in a gist, this is a spiritual concept that advocates living existence, such as mankind. We borrow our existence from our creator, from the divine. So this philosophy was founded by other Sufi masters, such as Ibn Arabi, Jami' Rumi Halaj, Abdul Qadir al-Jailani. So these Sufi masters also, it's naturally that they bore a significant influence on Hamzah Fansuri, and that is clear in his writings and way of thinking, because in his writings, in his prose, he included translated passages of Ibn Arabi and Jami' and so on. So and it would be reasonable to assume that his writings about this philosophy is the first time that such a transfer of knowledge occurred in the Malay world, right? So because of his spiritual orientation, Hamzah Fansuri was and also seen today as a bearer of heretic teachings, because of his spiritual philosophy, Wahdatul Wujud. And it was for this reason that he was rejected by another renowned scholar during his time, Nuruddin Arwani, who was from Gujarat, India, if I'm not mistaken. So, but we need to know that this is also a subjective matter, and that there have been works that defend Hamzah Fansuri, such as Sayyid Naqib al-Attas and so on, who say that Hamzah Fansuri is no heretic, but rather was a spiritual reformer. Well, so moving on. So Hamzah Fansuri, he was not just a poet, like I mentioned. He was also a writer. He was also a scholar who wrote religious and spiritual writings to educate his society at the time. So there are three works here, and that is, the first is the Sharab al-Ashiqin. Dr. Faizal mentioned how the concept of ishq is prominent in Sufism, which is passionate kind of love. And that is a characteristic of Sufism, and that is reflected in the works of Hamzah Fansuri. So this work, the Sharab al-Ashiqin, is for beginners who would like to take the first steps into spirituality, and it's also regarded as the first one to include passages and teachings from Ibn Arabi and also Al-Jili. So the second work, another important work, is the Asrarul Arifin, which means the secret of the knowledgeable. And this is seen as a literary masterpiece because of the high quality of prose and poetry. So it's a mixture of prose and poetry, and it's also regarded as the first of its kind because it's the first work in the Malay world where the writer provided his own explanation of what he had written, and that is actually something common in Arabic literature. So it's another proof how he was influenced by Arabic literature and also Persian literature. So the third one is the Al-Muntahi, which means the expert, and this showcased his mastery in Arabic and Persian, showing that he's not just into rituals and so on, but he was also highly intelligent. He possessed also a scholarly spirit because it's clear that his intentions of writing all of his works was to educate the society at the time. He believed it was a necessity for him to write such works. So another interesting point about Al-Muntahi is that he wrote the guide on how to unveil the veiled treasure inside mankind. And this unveiled treasure is, of course, a prominent concept of Wahdatul Wujud. And this treasure inside mankind is something that will connect us closer with our Creator. So I will now move on to sharing certain verses of from Hamza Fansuri's poetry. So there are two. I will be taking two poems, and that is the Syair Perahu, which means the poem of the vessel, and then the second one is the Rubai Hamza Fansuri. So the Syair Perahu is a beautiful work of poetry because it uses simple yet deep analogy to impart wisdom and advices. And as the title suggests, it has a nautical theme, using imageries of vessels, river, fishes, corals, and so on. So this poem uses the parable that mankind is like a vessel sailing in a river or at the sea. So the second one that I will be sharing is the Rubai Hamza Fansuri, and this is also a unique work, also a special work because it's one of the works where his disciple and student provided a commentary on it, called the Sharah Rubai Hamza Fansuri. His disciple is Shamsuddin Asmatrani. So the word Rubai also is another proof of the connection between Arabic literature, Persian literature, and also Malay literature, because Rubai is an Arabic and Persian poetry style, a 4-line stanza. So so this work, the Rubai Hamza Fansuri, while the Syair Perahu consists more of practical advices and so on, Rubai Hamza Fansuri consists more about the principles of his spiritual philosophy, Wahdatul Wujud. So this is an interesting line. So I think there are two types of orientations in the poetry of Hamza Fansuri. The first would be a religious orientation, meaning that it's applicable and relevant to those who share the same faith as him. But another orientation is of a universalistic orientation, meaning that it's applicable and relevant to others regardless of their faith. So this is one such example. I think for this one, if you look at it from a literal perspective, Hamza Fansuri is advising us to strengthen the tools of our vessels because the mouth of the river is narrow, and he warns us that awaiting there are fishes and also sharks. So, but if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, I think it's very interesting because what exactly does it mean by strengthening the tool of our vessels? So if you look at it from a sophistic perspective, one of the interpretations can be is to safeguard the tools of our bodies, meaning that our eyes that we use to see, our hands, limbs, our ears, and these are tools. So I think another way we can interpret this as how we utilize our eyes, our ears, will affect us spiritually. So it's important for us to safeguard on what we consume with our eyes and what we do with our limbs as well. So the next one is that if we interpret the literal meaning of the stanza, Hamza Fansuri is saying that although the estuary is deep and the fishes are many, this might be the location where your vessel will sink, and underneath the surface are sharp rocks, sharp corals that are sharp as waves, and it will be upon the sand that you will suffocate. So, although the metaphor can be quite straightforward, right? For example, meaning that there might be some time where you might be feeling down or affected and so on. But I think another interesting takeaway is his usage of the language here, meaning that he uses the word ikan pun banyak, fishes are many. And if we reflect upon this, fishes are something good, right? It's beneficial. It's something that we eat. It's something that can sustain us. But still, Hamza here says that even though the fishes are many, this location might be where you will sink. So I think this is actually an analogy of how in life there might be temptations that might appear as good and beneficial, like the fishes in the river, but there is still a chance that if we do not practice restraints and if we are not wise, these beneficial things might actually result in our downfall. So this is from the Rubai Hamza Fansuri. The first two were from the Syair Perahu. So this stanza is also interesting because Hamza Fansuri uses one of the many unique terms that he uses in his poetry, and that is anak dagang. So, but first, the literal meaning of this verse is that Hamza Fansuri is calling us to know ourselves. Kenal dirimu, hai anak dagang. To know ourselves, and this is a unique term, anak dagang, which means trader. It's referring to the reader as a trader, and he tells us that we should always try to remember the divine physically through litanies and also spiritually, so that we would be able to continue upon this firm path that will lead us closer to the divine. So what exactly does he mean by anak dagang? What exactly does he mean by trader? And this is a creative translation on the part of Hamza Fansuri regarding the sophistic term stranger, gharib or ghuraba. And that is a sophistic concept in which Sufi teachings encourage us to see ourselves as strangers in this worldly life, meaning that we shouldn't be too comfortable in what we see around us. We shouldn't be too comfortable in this world because it's just a temporary abode. So Hamza uses the term trader instead of stranger because he knows that in his context, in his Nusantara context, the word trader would actually resonate more with society, because at that time in the Malay world, trading in foreign lands was common practice, and so being a trader in foreign land to him is it means that you are a stranger as well. Meaning that you're a stranger in a foreign land, you should be like that towards this worldly life as well. Yes, so the last stanza that I will be sharing is that the literature, he's advising us to not forget ourselves. Kenal dirimu, know yourself, and do not forget about the true nature of our existence, meaning that just like aforementioned, meaning that we should see this world as a temporary abode. That is the true nature of our existence. So, and he also reminds us that if we want to reach a higher station, if we want to achieve strong spirituality, then we need to to strive and acquire the relevant knowledge. So this is another interesting takeaway is the term that he uses, and that is the anak jamu. So anak jamu means guest, right? So this is another Sufistic concept from introduced by the philosopher and jurist Imam al-Ghazali, who defined this world as a table laid out with food atop, with food and cutleries of gold and silver and fragrant perfumes, and we are mere guests on this table. So those who are wise, Imam Ghazali says that those who are wise would eat what they need, smell the fragrance, say thank you, and leave the table. And he says that, but those who are foolish would try to steal the cutleries of gold, meaning that strong materialism, but only to be denied and be in a condition of shame and disappointment. Because materialism in Sufi, materialism doesn't really provide much contentment and so on. Yes, so now I will be sharing my personal reflection from reading the works of Hamza Fansuri. Another point of relevance in his poetry is his call for critical self-reflection. And as I mentioned, he was seen as a spiritual reformer of his time, and it's mainly because that he wrote against what he deemed as directionless acts of spirituality during his time. And he wrote about how people would go into the jungle for a period of time only to be denied of spirituality. So it's therefore, so his calls for spirituality are focused and also practical, with frequent calls of equipping ourselves with the relevant knowledge. And I think this is relevant with our current society today, especially for our fast-paced and demanding lifestyle. How do we balance between our mental and material, mental and spiritual needs? Because there is no denying that as a society, it's common knowledge that we are suffering cases from mental health issues and so on. So this is why I think works like Hamza Fansuri, Rongo Wisoto, and also Bulleh Shah, although they are of a specific religious orientation, they still consist of spiritual values that are relevant to all of us. And also another point of relevance in his poetry with our context is how it gives balance to our current lifestyle. And I think as human beings, we yearn for some form of spirituality, right? We will never be just satisfied with material wealth. And to my understanding, spirituality means to find peace and inner strength and contentment either in ourselves or in other sources. And I think what we have been doing now for this program and also for the past few days, sharing our love for literature and poetry, transcending language and culture, is a form of spiritual contentment actually. Because I do not believe that we have much to gain materially from events such as these, but I think our hearts and souls are the beneficiaries of such efforts. Our hearts and souls are nourished by literature and poetry, and I think amidst this period, I think we should always try to seek out the ocean of poetry, because there we will find pearls of wisdom and also beauty. So I will end my presentation with so these are the sources I used for this presentation. So I will end my presentation with a beautiful quote from a movie, The Poet Society. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. In medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. That is all from me. I apologize if there are any mistakes in my presentation, and thank you for listening. All right, thank you. Back to you, Sheikh.
All right, thank you, Ubaidillah, and the rest of our panelists for your wonderful discussions. And I'm sure most of us here have learned a thing or two from your interesting discussions. So now we have come to the Q&A session where members of the audience can direct questions to our panel. And I'm afraid in the interest of time, we can only take one question. And as I can see here on our Facebook Live, there's already one question from our audience member. So maybe to the panelists, any of you can step up to answer the question. So the question is from a user named Hamid Ismail. And his question is, why do many Sufi exponents who practice Wahdatul Wujud end up being executed by the rulers of their era? I'm just going to repeat the question one more time. Why do many Sufi exponents who practice wahdatul wujud ended up being executed by the rulers of their era? So any of the panelists can answer that question.
Maybe I'll try to take. Okay, interesting question from Hamid Ismail about why many Sufi ended up being executed. In the case of Java mysticism or Java Sufi figures, there is one who also get executed by the teaching of Wahdatul Wujud, or in the Javanese context is Manunggaling Kawula Gusti, and some argue that it is still debatable issue, but the point is some argue that the teaching of Wahdatul Wujud is deemed to be out of the teaching line, out of line of the teaching religious. But the other thing say that this man who get executed is no longer because he did that, but he want to be killed. It reminds me of what Ahalla said about beautiful death in many Sufi contexts. So maybe to me, the reason why many who practice get executed is because of many different point of view or different arguments. So it's ended up becoming that. Okay, maybe it's for me. Thank you.
Right. Any of the other two panelists? Do you have anything to add on to Ahalla's answer? Okay, then I guess we'll move on. I'm sorry to the other members of the audience who have questions. Maybe we can work out a way, that you can contact the panelists after the session. But in the interest of time, we have to move on with our program. So again, thank you to the panelists and to the audience for your participation. We are almost reaching the end of the program, but before that, we have a performance from Ikhwanul Muntaqa, a group of youth who came together regardless of their diverse backgrounds due to their passion for music, especially that of the sacred qasidah, which has formed a strong bond between them. The qasidah is an ancient Arabic word and a form of writing poetry. In Arabic, Ikhwanul means brotherhood and Muntaqa means the chosen one, a word occasionally used to refer to the Prophet Muhammad. The group aspires to spread the message of peace and brotherhood, and the words to their qasidah will also be flashed on screen during the performance. So without further ado, let us invite Ikhwanul Muntaqa.
Test 1, 2. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you guys enjoy with our performance. So we present to you our first song. We call it Maula Ya Salli Wa Sallim. Inshallah. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik alayhi wa ala alihi. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم نبينا الأمير الناهي فلا أحد أبر في قولي لا منه ولا نعمي هو
صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. دعا إلى الله فالمستمسكون به مستمسكون بحبل غير منفصم. فوق النبيين في خلق وفي خلق ولم يدانوه في علم ولا كرم وكلهم من رسول الله ملتمس غرفا من البحر أو رشفا من الديام. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. وواقفون لديه عند حدهم من نقطة العلم أو من شكلة الحكم. فهو الذي تم معناه وصورته ثم اصطفاه حبيبا بريء النسم منزه عن شريك في محاسنه فجحر الحسن فيه غير المنقسم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. كما جاءته النصارى في نبيهم واحكم بما شئت مدحا فيه واحتكم وانسب إلى ذاته ما شئت من شرف وانسب إلى قدره ما شئت من عظام. فإن فضل رسول الله ليس له حد فيعرب عنه ناطق بفم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. كالزهر في ترف والبدر في شرف والبحر في كرم والدهر في همام كأنه وهو فرد من جلالته في عسكر حين تلقاه وفي حشم كأنما اللؤلؤ المكنون في صدف من معدن منطق منه ومبتسم لا طيب يعدل تربا ضمها ضماه مبالم تشيق منه وملتثم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik alaihi wa ala alihi. So, Alhamdulillah, without further ado, we will present to you, we will be performing another song, 2 songs only, inshallah. So, we present to you the second song of Maulaya Salli wa Sallim. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير خلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم أبان مولده عن طيب عنصره يطيب مبتدئين منه ومختتمين يوم تفرس فيه الفرس أنهم قد أنذروا بحلول للبؤس والنقام وبدأ ونكيس وهو منصدعون كشمل أصحاب كيس وغير ملتئم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم والنار خامدة الأنفاس من أسفي عليه والنهر ساء العين من سدمي وسأسى وتآن غدت بحيرتها ورد واردها بالغيب حين ضمي كأن بالنار ماء بالماء من بلل حزنا وبالماء ماء بالنار من ضرم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير للخلق كلهم والجن تهتف والأنوار ساطعة والحق يظهر من معنى ومن كلم حق وصم فإن ذات المشاعر لا تسمع وبارقة من دار لم تشمي من بعد ما أخبر أقوى مكاينه بأن دينهم موجه لم يقم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير للخلق كلهم وبعدما عينوا في الأفق من شهوب منقطة
وقفوا يطرى منهزمين كأنهم هربا أبطال أبرهة أو عسكر بالحصى من راحتيه رمي ذبذا به بعد تسبيح ببطنهما نبذ المسبح من أحشاء منتقمين مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله. Thank you.
Thank you, Ikhwanul Muntaqa, for that wonderful performance. All right, guys, looks like we have come to the end of our program. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank Dr. Faizal, our panelists, Ahalla Tsauro, Saddiq, Basha, and Ahmad Ubaidillah, and also Ikhwanul Muntaqa for gracing our event today. I would also like to thank the National Arts Council for supporting this event. And thank you to the audience for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. Hopefully this event has been beneficial in one way or another to all of us. So before we close this event, forgive us for any shortcomings on our side, and I hope you enjoyed your time. Thank you once again and stay safe.
For Ikhwanul Muntaqa, maybe don't exit so fast first, because we will have to take a picture first.
When Aziza is not here.
Can I want to share some ending slide?